story on Indigenous affairs. We don't get enough of them, but today we've had two young Indigenous students, a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old, on scholarships at different high schools. Here in Canberra, they are the winners of the If I Were a Prime Minister speech contest. This is a program that's run by the Australian Indigenous Education Foundation. The winners, we're about to hear a little of their speeches. Firstly, Wyatt Cook-Revel, he is 16-year-old from Ipswich Grammar, and 17-year-old Matthew McDonald, he's from Scotch College in Perth, but hails from Geraldton. These are pictures of them actually meeting the Prime Minister, and that's just happened in the last half hour as I understand it. But earlier today, we caught up with them. They gave us a taste of their speeches. Let's have a look, starting with Wyatt Cook-Revel.
If I were Prime Minister, the first thing I'd do is commit to increase Indigenous representation in our parliaments across Australia. With a grand total of 784 elected positions in all parliaments across this nation, only 18 of these are held by Indigenous people, still only meeting 2.5%. This is not about having quotas, but instead breaking barriers and seeing more productive and innovative ideas. We've done it with women, so now it is time to do it with our First Nations peoples.
My people need someone of their own who they can look up to, someone who's educated and caring of their needs. Instead of sending all our troops overseas, I would send some of them into a remote community to help these communities become self-sufficient.
We need to work hard to close the gap and overcome Indigenous disadvantage right around this country. We need to work hard to make sure that our community is a fairer place, where all people have the opportunity to good health, education and employment.
So I would work toward unity and peace in our country. I would encourage people to respect and share their culture, and educating people by sharing the knowledge about their history and cultural protocols so that unity can be achieved.
I believe in an Australia where our hard work sets us up in super retirement or pays for pensions, where our welfare system is the envy of the world, where your destiny is not predetermined by your parents' wealth, where regardless if you're a teenager in a rural town or a boy from the city, you should study in a great school, have the opportunity to a university education, learning a trade or taking up a rewarding job.
I would lower the wage for entry into school to improve the numeracy and literacy levels of all Australian children. I would create a program for adults to learn how to read, write and improve numeracy while working and earning wage, which will encourage people to stay on board and improve themselves.
We should have a first-class national broadband network and transport systems connecting the city with the country. We should have the best public hospital and primary care system in the world.
I would build bigger housing complex to address homeless in Australia and employ services to work with and empower homeless people to be educated, enter back into the workforce and then eventually buy their own homes. I would give money to services needed to educate and empower the people who are struggling with drug and alcohol addictions. I would build better treatment facilities where families could visit or stay long-term and educate and employ staff from each region that will have strong influence and encourage people. There would also be financial bonus for each successful client that completes the course and stays clean for 3 years period.
I believe diversity and inclusiveness are important qualities for Australia. This starts with celebrating the diversity of our multicultural communities, making sure that marriage is not about gender but two people who love each other above all else, and making sure that we treat women equally in society, in opportunity, in pay and in leadership. That's my vision for Australia. What's yours?
Well, Andrew Penfold is from the Australian Indigenous Education Foundation, running this particular contest, but also the whole scholarship program itself. I spoke to him as well today. Andrew, it takes a lot of courage for anyone to get up and give a public speech. These two did a pretty good job, though, today. You must be pretty proud of them.
Yeah, I am. I think, as you say, it takes a lot of courage, and what the great thing is that these boys have been able to go to a good school, get an education and really kind of take their place in the world. And even though they're only 16 and 17 years old, you can see that they're really starting to think about the big issues of the future. They're really acutely aware of the issues that are facing their communities, and they want to be involved in the solutions for them.
Well, they're dealing in their speeches with some pretty heavy topics, you know, drug and alcohol abuse, the access to healthcare and child safety as well, not to mention Indigenous representation in parliaments around the country. Are these all ideas that they've come up with themselves?
Exactly. The students were all asked to research and come up with their own ideas around their speeches. Obviously they have teachers and others at the school who they can bounce ideas around and so on, but they're engaged in the learning process. They're engaged in thinking about the issues that are confronting the future of their communities, and not just the Aboriginal communities, but also for all Australians. You know, we heard them talking about national broadband and infrastructure and access to early childcare and so on. So these are the big issues of the future, and it's really great to see that these boys are, you know, confident enough to be able to talk about those issues and to think about the future for themselves.
Tell me about the scholarships that they're on.
So we've been providing scholarships for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids to go to some of the leading boarding schools in the country now for a bit over 7 years. And we've currently got 500 students at school and university all around the country on scholarships. We basically believe that Aboriginal kids should be able to access the best schools in the country, and they shouldn't be denied access to schools depending on where they live or the circumstances into which they were born. So we've partnered with the Australian government and the private sector to provide scholarships for kids to be able to access these great schools around the country, currently at around 500 students per annum, and we've got a great success rate where 92% of those kids are staying at school and finishing Year 12 and then making a successful transition.
And you'll help them into uni if that's what they want to do?
Yes, that's right. We run a very comprehensive support program that starts in their sort of middle schooling years with mentoring and case management and support. So we help them make that transition from school into university and careers and into the workforce, and provide the ongoing support and mentoring they need.
Finally, when it comes to Indigenous disadvantage, I mean, so many things have been tried over so many years. How important is this, education at this level?
I think you can speak to any Indigenous leader in the country, any student in the country, and any person who's involved in policy at all, and everyone comes back to that starting point. Education is the key. It's not just about educating the student, it's about providing role models for the future, leadership in their communities, and having Aboriginal people at the centre of decision making for decisions that affect their future and their communities. So education is the foundation for everything, whether it's jobs, economic development, or improved healthcare, lowering the incarceration rates in prison, lowering the welfare rates, reducing domestic violence and so on. It all starts with education, and that's why I always say education is actually the silver bullet.
Well done to you and the boys. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David.
As I say, not often that we do get such positive stories when we talk about Indigenous disadvantage. That is the Australian Indigenous Education Foundation. Look them up if you want to help them out. We'll take a break coming up on PM Agenda in our next half hour. Catherine King, latest Shadow Health Minister, talking to us about their plan unveiled today to hike cigarette taxes. Stay with us.